Divide the length of the throat by the number of miters, and this will be the width of the throat miter cut. In this case, it is 6 inches divided by 6, or 1 inch. Mark the pipe insulation sections on the inside edges of the throat and heel dimensions as shown. This is where you'll cut the segments. There are power tools that make cutting miters a breeze. This bandsaw was made to cut insulation. It has a miter tabletop consisting of an angle guide and angle bar. To cut miters on a bandsaw, determine the number of miters required, A on the chart. Determine the back miter dimensions, B on the chart. Set the backstop to the corresponding distance from the saw blade. Put the pin into the number of miters hole in the angle bar. In this case, it is 6. Place the half section of pipe insulation against the angle bar with the end just touching the stop bar and trim off an end piece and discard. Swing the angle bar to the opposite position and hold the insulation snug against it and the backstop bar. Push table forward, cutting the first miter section. Proceed to cut the required number of miters. In this case, 12 for the 2 halves. Spray edges with adhesive, let dry, join sections, and you're done. It may be necessary to remove a small band of insulation from the first miter to fit over the weld. Mitered elbow insulation can be finished to suit job specifications. On cold work, the fiberglass vapor seal can be accomplished by wrapping the fitting with aluminum foil and taping it closed with cloth tape. It can also be finished with mastic and reinforced fabric or with a PVC cover. For tees, you can insulate them by using molded fitting halves like these, or by wrapping with fiberglass blanket insulation and finishing with PVC covers, or by fabricating from pipe insulation. It's simple to fab these right on the job. Start with a section of pipe insulation the same size as on the piping adjacent to the fitting. Lay it face up on the cutting surface and place another section face down at 90 degrees like this. Mark on each edge. Connect the marks and use a saw or knife to cut out a V section. Nice and neatly now. For screwed fittings, you make relief cuts to fit over the L shoulders. Use the same technique to fabricate the other part of the T. Take 2 half sections, mark as before. Now, instead of cutting out a V-notch, cut all the way through, making 2 pointed half sections that nest neatly together. Adhere, and you have 1 T-half. Make another, and the T is done. Install and hold in place with twine or tape, then finish off with a PVC fitting cover or another finish the same as you did for elbows. Valves are just like T's, except you have to make allowance for a valve stem and other valve irregularities, like the one shown here. We'll get into valves a little later, but before we do, let's insulate a reducer, a coupling, and a union. First, the reducer. The easiest way to insulate this fitting is to carry the pipe insulation over the larger shoulder and body of the fitting. On screwed fittings, the insulation must be relief cut and skinned away for the length of the reducer. Cut down deep enough to clear the shoulder and skin out a layer of insulation, just like making a relief cut as before with L's and T's. Install the insulation and fill any voids with blanket fiberglass insulation. Select insulation for the smaller pipe size. Install and butt up against the larger section. On heated lines, you're done unless a finish is required. For cold work, seal the exposed insulation end with vapor barrier mastic. Inline couplings are simple with fiberglass insulation. Relief cut the insulation and apply. Unions on hot lines are usually left bare so they can be found and pipe wrenches used to disconnect them. For cold lines, unions need to be insulated and vapor sealed. If the pipe insulation is thick enough, it can be relief cut and installed over the union. If not, insulate with a short section of nesting size of pipe insulation and seal the exposed ends with vapor barrier mastic. Mark the insulation jacket union. Next are flanges. Flanges can be welded or screw thread connected to the pipe or fitting. They are held together with bolts and sealed with a gasket. Flanges are insulated using oversized insulation and insulation collars, or blanket insulation and PVC covers, or finished with metal. Pipe insulation should be installed on each side of the flange, but stopped a distance from the flange that allows the bolts to be removed. The end of the pipe insulation should be beveled. On cold systems, the end of the insulation must be vapor sealed to the pipe. If the insulation on the pipe is less than 2 1/2 inches thick, a short collar section is installed on each side of the flange to bring the outside diameter of the insulation out even with the OD of the flange. Make the collars from a short piece of pipe insulation that nests with that on the pipe, or they may be cut from fiberglass board insulation material. To determine the flange pipe insulation size, refer to this handy table. The thickness should be the same as adjacent pipe insulation. Measure between the collars for the length. After the flange cover is in place, check to make sure the ends are flush and even with the collar pieces. If not, trim until they are flush. Check that the joints are tight. Flanges can also be insulated using prefab fittings made up in the shop or with molded fiberglass fittings. On cold work, make sure to seal all the fiberglass using vapor barrier mastics. Insulating flange valves is similar to the inline flange we just did, with additional step required to insulate the bonnet. Insulate the pipe up to the valve flanges. Then make the collars and apply them. Select the section of pipe insulation to fit over the flanges and valve body, the same thickness as on the pipe and long enough to reach flush from collar to collar. This is the valve body insulation. Measure the outside diameter of the bonnet flange and select pipe insulation to fit. Make this piece long enough to end just below the packing nut and adhere them together. Cut a disc from board insulation to fit the end of the bonnet section and around the valve stem. Install. Fill any voids with scrap material and install finish to match the pipe insulation jacket. Flange valves located indoors can also be insulated with blanket insulation and PVC covers. Metal jackets are the preferred method for valves located outdoors. What you have just seen are tried and proven ways to insulate the easy way when you know how. And now you do. Remember, neatness counts. The next training video will cover insulating ducts, tanks, and other flat and curved surfaces. It's called Insulating with Fiberglass Board and Blanket.